So PatientView is an organization that really just surveys patient organizations rather than patients. And as part of our brief, we've been looking at ways that pharmaceutical companies can be more patient-centric, because obviously that is one of their goals. As part of all this process, we've looked at the specific examples of patient engagement in pharma R&D. Now, one of the reasons that we've done that is, although this is research from 2018-2019, we've just completed research in 2020-21, and the figures are virtually the same, that 80% of patient groups worldwide, and typically the numbers in our surveys are approaching 2,000, tell PatientView that pharma is only fair or poor at engaging patients in R&D. But as we know, the pharmaceutical companies want to be more patient-centric across the board, including at an R&D level. And after all, R&D is the engine that drives the pharmaceutical industry. And as we know that patients and patient groups regard R&D as a very important part of the whole pharmaceutical process because it gives patients hope. But at the same time, patient groups are putting the whole R&D process under greater scrutiny to try and understand its ins and outs. So this relates to work that we did in 2017 and 2018, though I'll just do a quick update at the end. And it involved about 2,000 patient organizations worldwide. And one of the reasons we choose patient groups is that we feel that they're a very exceptional stakeholder because they're the only stakeholder in healthcare to network with every single other stakeholder in healthcare. And they also are unique because they understand patient needs, but they also can express them and translate them for pharmaceutical companies, so pharmaceutical companies can act in a way that's meaningful to the company. So they are a fantastic resource. The three areas we looked at in this research was firstly, what sort of aspects of R&D do patients want to be involved in as expressed by patient organizations? How should, in those areas, how should pharmaceutical companies improve their patient centricity? And then finally, we put together a sort of toolkit for the pharmaceutical industry so that they can be more patient-centric in R&D to support that whole endeavor. So just a quick overview of the results is that in all the phases of R&D, right from the beginning where you're determining unmet patient needs, as Hannah described, through to when we withdraw the products from the market, patients want to be involved in every single step. And just to give you an example, and this is just sort of the headlines, at each step, some examples of what was said. This again echoes what Hannah said, is that when you are deciding what areas to investigate as a pharmaceutical company, it's very important that you try and explore treatments that patients want, not that they don't want. And so one example we were made aware of is fatigue in rheumatism, because that was something not necessarily identified by clinicians. But Hannah gave another example about independence, stigma is another one. And so there are all sorts of needs that patients are very aware of in their day-to-day life that may not emerge in discussions with clinicians. Now, having decided which areas you're going to focus on, then you have to decide which patient populations you're going to test or you employ in your clinical trials, which technology platforms. And clearly, patient groups want clinical research to be as broad as possible and meaningful to them as individuals, because often as not, the clinical trial doesn't bear a resemblance to the patient that is who goes to see their doctor. They've got comorbidities, etc. So that it's very important that the clinical data is as relevant as possible to the real clinical setting. Then once you start conducting clinical trials, obviously patients want to not only help define endpoints, outcomes, but they want to be involved in the trial design. and particularly in the ethical aspects of trial design. And one example, again, that was given to us was about children with cancer. How often do you take a biopsy in clinical trials? You don't want to take them too often, but what is the optimum? And to discuss this with patient groups or patients. Then you have to build evidence for regulatory authorities, and patient groups want to contribute to that evidence and have a voice there, which many already do with many regulatory authorities. Sorry, I'll just take a drink.
Cool.
Then we have the drug reimbursement, where patients feel that they have a contribution to make. And again, there's a lot of work in this area, and particularly with patients with life-threatening conditions, where the patients feel they can take a greater risk than probably the HTA authorities believe. Then there's collecting real-world evidence and sharing experiences about what it's like to be on this treatment, and possibly other populations that could use the treatment, having had the clinical trial approval, and perhaps broaden it to a wider range of the population, and then patients can contribute to that. And lastly, we come to the point when the product has reached the end of its lifetime, but of course the products are valued by those patients, and therefore patients feel they should be involved as how those products should be withdrawn from the market. So this is just the headline examples. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that the patient said, I won't read all of them because of the time, but just to take a couple of examples. Patients sometimes are willing to take more risks than regulatory bodies and or industry are daring to consider. That was a national cancer patient group from Lithuania. Ease the transition when a medication goes off exclusivity labels so that patients can still get the drug. And that's a national neurological conditions patient group from the USA. And these are just 6 out of thousands of comments that we receive and categorize so that we can get a very clear picture of what it is that these patient groups feel they can contribute. So this slide is probably far too complex from Zoom, but it's just the headlines that we've picked up about the processes that go on in R&D right through the whole cycle, and what the headlines are that patient groups think are important. But in doing so and having categorized it, we then go back and then develop a toolkit which consisted, in this case, of 128 questions, which were formulated with the support of patient group evidence to act as a checklist for pharma, saying, am I doing this? Am I doing this? According to what the patient groups have defined. So it gives you a sort of interaction with the patient group world at a very broad level, and a sort of feeling within the company that are they along the right track in being patient-centric with R&D. And my final slide really has to do with the COVID pandemic, because that's changed everything. And the roles of the vaccines and the way that regulators and government and pharma are working together, the vaccine rollout has had a big, profound change in the way that R&D is possible. And this is from the most recent studies that we've been doing. And just again, not to read everything again, headline things of feedback that patient groups have given us, saying what they feel should happen as a result of COVID in non-COVID chronic diseases. And that's the accelerated R&D, to learn how that happened in COVID and perhaps translate it to other treatments. One of the things that patient groups patients really liked, according to patient groups, was that treatments that had to be delivered in hospital were adapted for the home. And so perhaps in future, many more treatments could be delivered in a home instead of the patient having to trot along to the hospital. Remote participation, which we'll probably hear from James about, the patients really, and patient groups enjoyed that. And the importance of real-world evidence, which was quite stunning, how we had the clinical trials with how the vaccines should be given out. And then after real-world evidence was collected, those clinical circumstances changed. And so this shows you the importance of real-world evidence in the whole equation, and that patients are very keen to participate in that. And that is me. And I wanted to thank again, like Anna, everyone, all the patient groups that participate in our survey, and also to DataSavesLives for letting us have our slot. Thank you.